Good morning, everyone. Pastor Tabitha here with this upcoming Sunday's lectionary passage. And before we get started, we're going to do a quick recap of Moses' life. It starts off with Pharaoh not having known anything about Joseph and about the Israelites living in Israel or in Egypt. um, Pharaoh doesn't like it. He's intimidated by the Israelites. So he steps up and he starts to enslave the Israelites, to oppress them, make life really hard for them. And as we know, the numbers just kept multiplying. So he decided to kill off all the baby boys under the age of 2. And um, and there was one mom who she's just like, I don't want my son to be killed. So she put him in a basket and had his sister watch over him. And the Egyptian princess went out to the bathing pools and she sees this baby and she pulls him out of the water and she says, I will call him Moses, for I took him up out of the water. Um, from there, we know that he was raised in or he started off his life with his mom and his sister. Um, and then he went on to live in the palace as a prince. Um, Eventually, he gets himself into a little bit of trouble um, by killing an Egyptian man who was hurting the Israelites. And the Israelites are, who made you better than we are? You did the same thing we did. And so Moses ran away out of fear of his life, and he moved in with a group of Israelites, and in that group of Israelites, he became a shepherd. And one day while he's out tending his sheep, he he sees the bush, and this bush is on fire, and it's a very peculiar sight. And so he approaches the bush and finds out that it's God, and God is telling him that he's going to go on and he's going to be used to deliver the Israelites from the Egyptians. He's like, but God, who's going to go with me? And God said, I'll send your brother Aaron with you. Um, and so then Aaron and Moses, they go to Pharaoh and they're like, Pharaoh, please let the Israelites go. And Pharaoh said no. And they said, please. And he said no. And after 10 plagues and 10 times of them begging for Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, um, he finally said no, and his heart was hardened, or his heart was turned away from God because he refused to deliver the Israelites. And we know that the spirit went through Egypt and he killed the firstborn sons of all of those who didn't have lamb's blood on their doors. That's just a hard passage to wrestle with in general. um, this hardened Pharaoh's heart even more, and he told Moses and Aaron to get their people out. And so these thousands of Israelites, they leave Egypt, and they're headed out. And just about the time they get to the Red Sea, they find out that the Egyptians are after them, and they're freaking out, and they're like, "What do we do?" And God tells Moses to hit the rock. And just before he does that, God sends a pillar of fire down to create a wall between the Egyptians and the Israelites. And as Moses hits the rock, the sea parts, and the Israelites walk through. And when the last Israelite gets through, Moses strikes the rock again, and the water comes crashing down over any of the Egyptians that had come too close. So now the Israelites are wandering in the wilderness. And as they're wandering in the wilderness, they come across a brood of snakes, and the snakes are biting them. And if they get bit by a snake, they're left to die. And Moses is cries out to God about what he should do. And God tells him to fashion a bronze serpent and put it up on his pole, or on his shepherd's staff. And every time that they would look at the snake on the shepherd's staff, they would be saved, and the poison from the bites wouldn't kill them, and they wouldn't get bit. But anytime that they looked away, they were at risk of getting bit and were at risk of dying. As they continued wandering, they started to complain. Life was better than in Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die? And two instances occur. The first instance, Moses goes and he talks to God, and um, God then provides enough food for them to survive off of on a day-to-day basis. The next time that they complain, though, they're not complaining that they should go back to Egypt. They're complaining about the fact that God had brought them out in the wilderness to die, that God wasn't real, that Moses just wanted the Egyptians or the Israelites to die. And we know that that wasn't really the case, but that's what the Israelites were going through, and that's what they thought. And Moses pleaded with them for his, or pleaded with God for his life, and God told him, to go and to strike the rock, and living water, when he did that, living water came from the rock, and the Egyptians, they turned their hearts back to God for a short bit anyway. um After that, Moses goes up on the mountain, and he goes into a relationship, or goes to sit down and talk with God, and God gives him what we call the 10 commandments, or um the 10 rules to follow, the 10 guidelines to follow, that help us to show love to both God and to others. Um, and then the Israelites are wandering in the wilderness again, and they come across, or Moses is up again on the mountain with God talking, um, and the Israelites began to doubt again the existence of God, and they began to doubt whether or not Moses was going to come down off the rock. Um, and so they told Aaron to fashion an idol for them. And so Aaron builds this gold cow to help the Israelites remember God and focus on God, and that didn't work. Instead, they said, "These are our gods that brought us out of Egypt," and they started worshiping the cow. And this made God angry, and God wanted to destroy the Israelites for turning their back on him. But Moses pleaded and reminded God about just the love and the relationship that God had, with the Israelites, and how much God cared for the Israelites. And so God relented in his anger, and um, he backed down. And he decided from there that that he would allow the Israelites to live. And so then they were wandering again, and Moses went out to have company with God, and God said, or Moses was like, "Hey God, who is gonna go with me? As I lead these Israelites in the wilderness for the next 40 years, who is going to go with me?" And God said, "My presence will be with you wherever you go." And then Moses is like, "Hey, can you show me your glory, God? I want to see you." And God tells him that um, that his face cannot be seen, but that he can go up on this mountain, and that um, God will push him back into a cleft when he passes by. And once he's passed, Moses can come out, and Moses can see God, um, see God's back, so that he can live, and he will then see God's glory. Um, which so when we pause and we look at Moses's life, we see how faithful God was to the Israelites, how faithful that God was to Moses. um, we see that God really loved Moses. God really loved the Egyptians. Um, and God was with them in their wilderness. God was with them in all of their timing, but because of their lack of faith and their lack of following God, the Israelites that left Egypt were not going to be able to see the promised land. But that the Egyptians that, or the Israelites that were born in the wilderness, they were going to be able to see the promised land. So Moses' time was coming to an end, and um, he asked, "Hey God, who's going to lead these guys?" And God revealed to Moses that it was going to be Joshua. Joshua and Caleb were the only two Israelites born in Egypt that were going to get to see the promised land, and Joshua was going to be the one to lead them there. Um, After this, Moses passed and the Israelites were, um, oh, Moses was 120. That's kind of old. Um, but the Israelites mourned for 30 days and then they were allowed to follow Joshua into the promised land. And Moses was the greatest prophet to that day. Um, this passage, by the way, is Exodus 34 1 through 12. I think that's the right one. Um, but it's that reminder that Moses was faithful and Moses was real. Moses was a leader who um really had a transformation from being the guy who was the oppressor, the guy who was a part of the systems that destroyed the Israelites, to being the leader of the Israelites who faithfully kept the relationship between God and between the Israelites going. Um, and just how the parallels we see of how Jesus loves and Jesus leads between how Moses loves and how Moses leads. Um, you see, we have a God who loves us and a God who journeys with us. Like we have a God, we have Jesus who intercedes and stands in the gap for us when we don't deserve it. But yet the wilderness is an experience. It's a time for us to be able to journey with God. And as we journey with God, He keeps His promises to us. And um, that as long as we're faithful in the journey, we'll see the promise at the end. Give me one second to the Bible verse. All right, so this week's verse is Psalm 90, verse 17. And it says, May the Lord be pleased with us. Lord, make what we do succeed. And that is Psalm 90, verse 7. Um, and as always, there's links below in the description for the children's ministry curriculum, but also for the adult Sunday school small group questions and conversation. So check those out, and thank you. I'll see you guys next week.